Okay, yeah. So the book of Revelations, I've been told by several people, requires more than 2 weeks of study or 2 weeks of class, but I can only do 2 weeks of this stuff. So that's why it's 2 weeks. Okay, so this is week number 2. Again, it's a book of mystery. It's a study in symbols, and it's a message of hope that hopefully we'll find at the end. And what did you think of it? A number of people, I think, read it again afresh or for the first time this past week. Any comments out there that you want to make public? Keep your thoughts private. Okay, we'll talk about it at the end. Okay, so I had asked several questions last week about reading it. One I found kind of curious is what got the saved saved? In other words, what does John of Patmos, who wrote Revelation, think gets people saved? There's definitely a saved and others. So what if you read it, get some ideas on that. And what's the spiritual significance is here? And I think some people have already answered in the negative. Okay, but is hope here? And that's a good question. And then especially asked, are you satisfied with the ending? I especially like Nan Schaefer's comment last week that she didn't really appreciate the ending very much. She was just glad she was done with reading the book. So, okay. And now, last week, a number of you raised some very good questions, and I have thought about them, and we'll see if I come up with good answers. Okay, there's 3 sections to the book, 3 visions, really, or maybe it's more likely a series of visions over years. Chapters 1 through 3 are the 7 letters to the 7 churches. Chapters 4 through 11 are the worship scroll with 7 seals. And chapters 12 to 22, what we'll do today, are the war scroll, along with how did this book get into the Bible anyway. So we're doing the last 2 items there. The war scroll, it actually starts with the last verse of chapter 11, and it goes on, and there's a lot of cosmic struggles in there, but I find it disconnected and repetitive. Someone else made that comment. So what I propose to do today is explore several images, provide some historical background that I hope you'll find interesting. I like history. We'll see. And then we'll look at how the book got into the Bible. And then at the end, I hope to have time to discuss your ideas. Okay, so it starts with what I call the Christmas story of Revelation. There's a woman pregnant. She's going to give birth, and waiting across from her is the dragon. Satan is going to devour the child as she gives birth. But the child is whisked up to heaven. And the story sort of the woman is the Jews who gives birth to the Messiah, right? There's the dragon and the beast. The dragon is Satan. The 2 beasts, most people say, are 2 aspects of Roman domination, either the conquering, the military, and the ruling, or the empire and the emperors, or various things. But it seems to be some way the 2 beasts are the Roman Empire. Okay? And then the beasts have 10 horns. Where did this come from? It's borrowed from the book of Daniel. And so we're going to look a little bit at some historical background of the Daniel visions in chapters 7 and 8. And I say chapters 7 and 8 are a history, basically, of a certain period of history, and I'll explain. It starts with the Babylonian Empire, conquered Judah in around 600 BCE. They destroyed the first Jerusalem temple in 586 BCE. And then the exile starts in there at the first conquering. They took some of the elite over to Babylon. They did it after the second destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. They took off some more, and they took the elite, the landowners, the royalty, priests, scribes. If you read the account in the Bible kind of quickly, it sounds like they took everybody. No, they just took everybody who was anybody, and most people were nobodies, and they were left behind. So about 5% of the population or so may have been taken to Babylon. But that 5% was the elite, and they came back after the exile. Now, how did they get back? Well, Persia with Media took over the Babylonian Empire in 539, so you can get 50-something years there, rounded up to 70, because 7, again, is the perfect number. 10 is totality, so 70 is much better than 59. So that's why it's a 70-year exile. Okay, then inroads the Persians were a good, much better empire. They knew how to run things. But Alexander the Great came in about 200 years after these events, and he defeated the Persians, set up his amazing empire. And then on his death, his empire was split into 4. He died in 323 at about 30-something years old. Amazing that he could do so much in such a little time. And Judah was, of the 4 kingdoms, one of them was the Seleucid kingdom, and that was where Judah was. The Ptolemies had Egypt and eventually Cleopatra and that, and there's other 2, I don't remember their names. And Judah was in the Seleucid kingdom, and Daniel was written at this time. Okay, so this is, in fact, Daniel was written at about 150 BCE, but it's written as if Daniel were up there with the Babylonians and the Persians. In fact, there's a metaphor that we still use, writing on the wall. This is the amazing vision where Daniel, or the king of Babylon, is sitting in his banquet hall, and in the air appears a hand, and it writes on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. And nobody knows what that means. So they get Daniel in, and he says, Mene, Mene. That means number. Your days have been numbered, king. Tekel means weighed. You have been weighed and found wanting. Parsin is word for Persian. Here come the Persians. You're going to get defeated. So that's the handwriting on the wall. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Okay, so that's Daniel, written again as if he was in that time. So he has a great view of history in his visions because he's afterwards. Okay. Now, what happened in this Seleucid kingdom was a very pivotal event in Jewish history that's out of our Bible. It's in the intermediary thing. And that's this guy here, whose nose is broken off, but it wasn't in the original, obviously. This is Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Epiphanes means God manifest. Basically, he said, look at me, you're seeing a God, okay? And so he enforced Greek culture. Again, Alexander the Great brought in Greek things. Antiochus is in the line of that. He was essentially probably a real Greek, but he wanted everything to be Greek, and including get rid of this Jewish stuff. And so he actually desecrated the temple in 168 BCE. He sacrificed a bull to Zeus on the altar in the Jewish temple. That was absolutely the worst thing that could have happened in their religion. And that led to the Maccabean revolt. It's just an amazing story of a ragtag bunch of non-professional soldiers defeating a professional army in the same army, using the same techniques that Alexander the Great used to roll through everything. These Maccabeans kicked them out of their country and were able to maintain their independence for about 100 years. Antiochus desecrated the temple. It took 3.5 years before they were able to restore the worship in temple and rededicate it. There's that 3.5 years. This is the origin of the 3.5 in all of Revelation. We talked about that last week. 3.5 is the evil number. So when he talks about an evil time lasting 3.5 years, it's this evil time he's talking about, when the temple was desecrated by Antiochus Epiphanes. And when they got done, they had this amazing celebration. And they still celebrate it today. What? Jewish holiday. Hanukkah? Yeah, Hanukkah. That's Hanukkah celebrated today is based because of Antiochus Epiphanes, who got kicked out of Jerusalem. Okay, so now we borrow several images. He borrowed several images, 4 beasts. He had 4 empires. We're talking about those in 10 horns. There were 10 Seleucid kings up to Antiochus IV. I don't get this imagery, but horns represent kings or power. Don't know why, but I haven't figured out that's what it is. So 10 horns, 10 Seleucid kings. A time, times, and half a time appears at least once in Revelation, 3.5 years. 42 months, 1,260 days, all of them in Revelation are ways of saying 3.5 years, the evil time, referring back to this. Now, Daniel had 4 empires. Babylon, the Media came in, but they sort of don't belong in here. But again, he needs 4 because 4 is the earthly number. You can't have 3 kingdoms, you got to have 4. So he puts Media in here. They were soon just the junior partner of Persia, which ruled for about 200 years. And then the Greek and Seleucid under Alexander the Great. So these are his 4 kingdoms. Now, if you read in Daniel 8, he talks about, here's my little revelation for the week. He's got a ram coming out of the east, and the ram has 2 horns. One horn's bigger than the other. That's Media and Persia. Persia's got a bit more status than Media. Then he has a goat coming out of the west that just runs over them. Now, that's Alexander the Great. Now, why is Alexander the Great a goat? In American sports, what does goat mean? G-O-A-T. Greatest of all time. So Alexander the Great has to be a goat. Yes, yes. You got that. That was my apocalypse for the week. Yeah, sometimes I amaze myself. You go, all right. All right. But now, okay, so then if you read in Daniel 8, he talks about there are several horns, and then there's one that really gets rambunctious and goes to the east, the west, the north, and tramples on the favored land and so forth. That's Antiochus Epiphanes. So if you read, and you know the history, and you read Daniel 7 and 8, it all matches. Okay, so yeah, he actually talks about this extra horn who comes in, Antiochus as reaching up to the heavens and scattering the stars. That's this Epiphanes stuff. I am a god. Okay, all right. But now John takes 4 kingdoms, but he takes Babylon, Persia, and their sub-partner Media, then the Greek and Seleucid, and he, of course, brings in the Roman Empire, who in 63 BCE conquered Judah. Okay, so this is why in Jesus' time, which would be 90 years after this, or so, it was Roman Empire, right? Now, the significant thing is the temple was destroyed. Who did it first? Babylon. Who did it second? Rome. So when John talks about Rome as Babylon the Great, he refers to Babylon because it refers back to the first destruction of the temple. Rome did the second one. Okay. And again, the second was destroyed in 70 because there was a revolt by the Jews against the Roman Empire, which from a historical perspective or political is an absolutely stupid thing to do. It's like Kansas trying to separate from the United States. I mean, this isn't going to work. You got them all around you, but anyway, they did it. And actually, then there was another one around 100 and some. They had several revolts. These Jewish people just did not learn to accept the Pax Romana. So anyway, that's the way it is. Okay. So now that explains the number of those images if you read. And the next one is this handsome man here, Nero. He was the fifth Roman emperor, ruled from 54 to 68 for 14 years. He blamed and persecuted Christians for burning Rome in 64 CE. Now, the burning may have been accidental, or he may have had some of his people start the fire because he wanted to build a palace in that area. He needed to do a little urban clearing. But almost certainly the Christians didn't do it deliberately, but he had to find a scapegoat. And he's the guy fiddling while Rome burns, right? So he probably killed the apostles Paul and Peter. He committed suicide at age 30. So again, that means he became emperor at 16. Wow. But not, or maybe not. There was these rumors because he did it in secret. The Senate had lost favor with him, so he had lost favor with the Senate, left town, and had one of his servants to kill him, or maybe killed himself, but nobody was sure. They thought he might come back again. And in fact, there were several revolts in the Far East or insurrections led by people who say, hey, I can fiddle, I'm Nero, and follow me and we'll take my rightful place as emperor of Rome again. And none of those survived very much. So that's Nero. But now we get another fascinating topic. It seems it's different. It'll connect. Numerology. In Greek and Hebrew, letters were used as numbers. They didn't have separate numbers. So in Greek, alpha is 1, beta is 2, gamma is 3, delta is 4, and so forth. You get up to 10, and then it goes by 10s, 10, 20, 30, and so forth. You get up to 100, the letter rho, and then it starts going by hundreds. And so you can write down fairly big numbers just using these letters. And they had a little mark they put on the page to say, this thing is a number, not a name. But okay, and then here's Hebrew. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, and that's the only Hebrew letters I know, so that's all. Then that leads to lots of number games, you might say. The Greeks actually wrote poetry where each line, when you added up them as numbers, they all added up to the same thing. And that would be a neat trick. I mean, a lot of work going into that. But they did various things like that. So then add up the letter numbers in a name, what does it mean? And with these people, many had maybe divine significance. And that's where you get Nero Caesar adds up to 666. But John says you need wisdom. You got to write it in the Hebrew alphabet, and then it adds up to 666. So why is 666 this awful number? Well, it's 3 digits, right? 3 relates to divine, but it's 6. It didn't make it to 7, right? It's imperfect. So we've got a sort of a divine imperfection here, or an attempt to be divine, as the Caesars were essentially worshipped. So you've got this imperfection. Now, one commentary had an interesting thought. It said, in John, it says it's the number of a man, but it might be the number of humanity. We are 666. We have the divine in us, 3 digits, but we're all imperfect. I still like Nero Caesar better, but that's a possibility. And the other thing is that with playing these games, you can get almost any emperor to be 666. But that's sort of not important, it seems. Nero stands for all of them. He was maybe the worst of them as far as the Christians were concerned at this time. So 666 stands for Roman Emperor. Okay, so how are we doing about time? Okay, meaning of other symbols. I think you most of all picked this up. The lamb that was slain is Jesus. The beasts are the Roman Empire. They have 7 heads. There's 7 Julian empires. There's 7 hills of Rome. So that's where the 7 comes from. Head wounded, but still lives. What does this mean? Well, one thought is it refers to the Caesars. Julius Caesar was killed, but the Caesars still live, right? Augustus Caesar, Tiberius Caesar, and so forth. And it could also be they're talking about Nero, who rumored to have escaped after his supposed suicide. But it somehow refers to one of these Roman entities. Then they talk about blasphemous names that are on the beast. Well, a good example is son of the divine Julius. So these Roman Empire emperors were declared by the Roman Senate to perhaps to be divine. Now, someone I read said, actually it didn't say they're divine, it said they are supposed to get the same devotion that you would give to a god. Okay, maybe the Roman senators didn't believe their emperors were God, but the guy in the street would say, if you got to worship him in the same way, what's the difference? So, but then there's this phrase, son of the divine Julius. Now, there are 2 words for divinity or God in Rome, in Latin, I guess. And one is Deos, Deo, which we use it for that would be Jupiter, Saturn, Venus, and those folk. Then there's Divus, which we get our word divinity from. This is people, things like Julius Caesar, who became a god. In fact, early in Augustus Caesar, who's the Caesar after Julius, early in his reign, there was a comet in the sky. And obvious to everybody. What that was Julius Caesar being taken to his rightful place among the gods, okay? So that is the kind of world John lives in. And there was basically empire worship. Caesar is Lord. And of course, you see the Christian statement is Jesus is Lord. So and Paul makes a big deal, actually, of Paul in his letters, Jesus is Lord versus Caesar is Lord. Now, no study of or discussion of Revelation is complete without the millennium, your discussion of it. Now, what this refers to is in there, they talk about 1,000 years of Christ's reign, Revelations 20. And during that time, Satan is bound. He is then released for a little while. Then he's thrown into a lake of fire. And it's often associated with the rapture in fundamental American Christianity. The rapture, by the way, is an American phenomenon. No other Christianity goes with this stuff. The rapture is the idea that you'll be when God is going to institute his new phase. We're walking along, and he goes up, and she goes up, and I'm staying behind. I don't know what happened. They're just that's the rapture. But there's no rapture in Revelation. Rapture is taken out of one of the Thessalonian books, I think. Thessalonians, okay. So the millennium is a metaphor. What's a metaphor? Well, I had a great example of this when I first mentioned to my wife that I was going to do a study of Revelation, a discussion, a 2-week class on Revelation. She said, I wouldn't touch Revelation with a 10-foot pole. Okay. Now, that's a metaphor because I understood exactly what she meant. And I think you understand it. But the idea is the 10-foot pole, physical distance, is used for a dislike or distrust or something like that. In fact, it's a great metaphor because we understand that metaphor perfectly. But if you had to write it out in English without using metaphors, it would be very difficult. What does that really mean? I wouldn't touch Revelations with a 10-foot pole. So there's the metaphor. And the millennium, we get time as a metaphor. Now, in English language today, we have a great metaphor using time. People say, I wouldn't do that in a million years. Or maybe you see some artistic thing. I couldn't do that in a million years. We understand exactly what that means. It isn't about time, right? It's about, if you see some artistic production, well, I couldn't do that in a million years, says that's the gap in that ability and my ability, so forth. So it has nothing to do with time. And say in the millennium has to do not with time, but God's power. God's power is big. Satan's power is small. Okay. So this is not a slide about areas of circles. All right. Just as the millennium is God gets 1,000 years, that perfect number, 10 to the third. 10 is totality, to the third, the divine. So you've got this divine totality, and then Satan gets a little bit of time, and then he's terminated. So that's the millennium is, again, not about time. It's about God's power. So, okay, now we'll get to the ending. New heaven and a new earth. Chapter 21 and so forth. Now, this you want to definitely is comparing the Genesis heaven and earth. God created the heaven and earth. Now he's got a new one. God will this time dwell among his people. He won't just come down to walk in the garden. He'll actually live among his people, and he will wipe every tear from their eyes. We got a very compassionate God here. And then he sees the new Jerusalem coming down, and he describes it as the bride of the Lamb. Now, we talked about metaphor. You got a city is a bride of a lamb. This is a case of extreme metaphor mixing. But I think you can say John is just so ecstatic and full of all the glory of this new Jerusalem. The current one had been destroyed and lay in ruins. So he's just so ecstatic. Words fall out of his mouth, and he does this mixing here. And in the new Jerusalem is the tree of life, for the healing of the nations. I think this is one of the great lines in the thing. After all of this beastly stuff, and so there's going to be healing for the nations, and our nations in this world need a lot of healing right now. So, good. We'll have enough time to talk about how it got in the Bible, and then we get plenty of time to talk. Okay, how did this book make it into our Bible? So the book was written about the year 90, all right? But somewhere around 100 or so, a little later, some guy named Marcion came up with some list of what he thought were really good Christian books. He had the letters of Paul and very little else. Okay, but later lists were bigger. And how to make it in the Bible, one of the main instrumental in this is Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria in Egypt, from 297 to 373. Now, Alexandria was the cultural and trade center of the Roman Empire. It took the grain from Egypt, spread it all over the place. It's got grain to, they had in Rome, they talked about giving them bread in circuses. The bread came from Egypt. You had to. So Alexandria was a very important city, and to be Bishop of Alexandria was a very important position. He was considered a founding father of the church. He's actually considered the first pope of the Coptic church, which is there in Egypt. He's a defender of the faith, especially the Trinity. And he attended the Council of Nicaea in 325. He would have been like 28 years old there or something. But now, so about 13 years before this is when Constantine had said Christianity is an approved religion in the Roman Empire. Persecution stopped for a while, but it stopped, and now the church was actually supported by the government. And so Constantine said, okay, you Christians, you're all out there. There's all different kinds of flavors of you. What does it mean to be a Christian? Meet together in Nicaea and come up with a statement. And they came up with the Nicene Creed. And Athanasius, although he was just a secretary of the Bishop of Alexandria at the time, whose name was Alexander. He was there to listen and so forth, but his subsequent career is very much in line with what Council of Nicaea did. Now, here's something that I would like to do some more research on. We are a Matthew 25 church. And that phrase comes out of Matthew 25. As much as you do it to these, my sisters and brothers, you do it unto me, says Jesus. The operative verb there is do, right? We are saying, when we're in Matthew 25 church, we believe to be Christians requires us to do something. So this is out of the Gospel of Matthew, that's first century written. Council of Nicaea, the verb do does not appear. The only verb that appears is believe. So what does it mean to be a Christian? In the first century, if you go along with Matthew, it says do. If you go after these church fathers in the 300s, it's believe. Do you believe in the Trinity? Well, it wasn't quite the Trinity there, but believe that Jesus was elevated and so forth. It's what you believe. And that strikes me as worth more study. I'd like to know. Okay, now, so the council, this Nicene Creed is really the earliest church creed. The Apostles' Creed was around, but not in a final form. That took several centuries later. So this is the Nicene, okay, and then Athanasius was very vigorous in fact, he was given the name Athanasius Contra Mundum. If you know a little Spanish or so, you can figure out Athanasius against the world. He had his position, and he advocated for it. This Trinity, especially, that was a big discussion of something called Arianism, which said Jesus was human, not divine, and he argued for that. Now, another thing about the Council of Nicaea, why it was so important and why afterwards they got so vicious in their attacks. That's because of Constantine. Once he said, the church is approved and I'm a Christian, I'm going to pay money to fund the bishops. And so once you get money involved, Christians don't behave very well. And these guys said, it was, you have a different view of Christ than I do, but we both believe he's our Lord and Savior. But because we're different, I'm going to run you out of town, burn your house down, and maybe I'll kill you. It was just not, I don't know. Anyway, so my opinion of Athanasius is that he's a narrow-minded, power-hungry zealot. Though I think as you look at it, a lot of those people in those days were, so he's not going to pick him out particularly on that. So how did he interpret Revelation in the newly Christian Roman Empire after 312 when Constantine authorized Christianity? Okay, remember we said it's fairly evident that the beasts were the Roman Empire. Well, not when it's Christian, so get rid of that one. You've got to replace it with something else. The Athanasius beasts were heretics and the Antichrist. Okay, now So suddenly he can hold different interpretation. In fact, this interpretation has lasted through the centuries. Now, the word Antichrist does not occur in Revelation. It comes out of the letters of John. But I've heard scholars talk about Revelation, and they mentioned the Antichrist. Well, it's not really. Now, also, it's interesting. I learned that Martin Luther, when he first got going, he thought Revelation should be out of the Bible. But then he thought, no, the beast is the Catholic Church. Okay. Bring the Revelation back into the Bible. Okay, so that's the way it goes. Okay. So, but Athanasius did do something that's historical significance in the formation of our Bible. He had a list of suitable Christian books that he put in his Easter letter of the year 367. And in it, he had Revelation. And it's basically his list is, I believe, the one we finally settled on. In between this letter, which just said, here's the good Christian books that I think I endorse, then others said, oh, but got to get rid of Revelation. But they don't bring it back in. And one of the things that brought it back in was they somehow identified it with the Apostle John, or disciple Apostle John, which many ancients already knew did not make sense, because the Greek is apparently quite different. The Gospel of John is written in a very fine Greek. This one is by Revelation is written by someone who didn't learn Greek naturally as their first language. It's kind of a little not as smooth and refined, but because of the association with that, and the fact that after his death, Athanasius was highly regarded by many, and he had this in his list that ultimately got in about 100 years after this. They actually finalized the discussion of what is to be in our New Testament. So, and we'll then go on to some thoughts of mine. Okay, and then we got time for discussion. Okay, we want change in our society. Our society is not perfect. We want some change in it. We're willing to do some things to do it. But John didn't want change in his life. He wanted the Roman Empire overthrown. Very few of us, I think, would say we want the U.S., our system, our culture to be overthrown. We're not there. We can obtain justice within our current system. We've got to change some laws, change some programs, change some attitudes, but within our current system, we probably can obtain justice. Most of us, I think, would agree with that. For John, there was no justice for Jesus' people within the Roman system. So he's coming from a different place than we are. But nonetheless, we have to ask, what do we as Christians do with this book? And I think two things are this. One thing is it's the awful reality of evil, the enormity of evil. Now, last week, someone said, well, God is love. Where is that in this book? Okay, you have to look for it. But we certainly also have in our world that there's evil out there. And it's not something, change an attitude here or there, change a program, change a law, and we'll get rid of evil. No, there's really, I think the war in Ukraine is an example of real evil. And so it's in our world. Then what are our satanic beasts today? Okay, John had the beasts that represented the Roman Empire. What are our satanic beasts? They're maybe not in institutions as much, but I would say racism, homophobia, sexism are my beasts of various sizes, and you can add to more of that. So that's good. I think we should look at it that way. John wrote this book out of fear and anger. He was angry at the Roman Empire for the treatment of the Christians, which wasn't wholesale persecution again, but there was some. He wrote it out of fear for his life, fear of life of those people, fellow Christians that he knew, fear that his brand of Christianity, which was a Jewish Christianity, was going to be taken over by the Gentile Christianity, and that he was right, because that's what happened. So we should ask, what do we do when we're afraid? We don't write a book of Revelations or have visions, but what do we do and how do we react? Maybe not the way John did. And despite everything that John was afraid of, he ended with hope, with a new Jerusalem out there, which comes down from heaven, and God is dwelling with his people. So two parting thoughts. Ultimately, God is in control of history. John saw that the beast must be defeated, the Roman Empire must be defeated, and God's good work will be come into be rewarded. And then the moral arc, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, as Martin Luther King Jr. said. And this is very interesting because it talks about a moral universe, not just a universe, but a moral universe. And John certainly saw the universe that way. It was moral universe in the sense of God working for his ends. And that's the end. And now I hear what you have to say.
I think that the beast constitutes a little bit different, like the racism and homophobia, all the isms. To me, are symptoms.
Are what?
Symptoms.
Symptoms.
And I think that part of it is being got in the system is the issue.
Okay, so Brenda's statement was that you see isms as symptoms of a system that is got evil in it. And yeah, oh, very good. Yeah. Jim.
Yeah, maybe it's an administrative question, but you mentioned he borrowed from Daniel. What would he have had access to as far as documents? And some of the footnotes, like when you went back to look at it, like they had Papyrus 47, like various codexes. And would he have had access to something like that where he could read prior writing?
The question was about how much did he have access to Daniel documents? Yes, he could very well have had access to documents, but certainly within a synagogue, they would have been that, and they would have read those stories over, and he would have maybe known them just from hearing them. Again, most people were illiterate at that time. Even John even says at the beginning that this is to be read among the churches. So you read it out loud because most people would be illiterate. But he must have had access to Daniel. It was a document that was being, disseminated throughout. Because Daniel was written about 200 years before this. Maybe not quite that, but he would have had that access to that, or have heard it. Yes.
So actually, being everybody here at that time, we be literate. I was actually kind of wondering the connection on how was it supposed to be portrayed with all the the connections and numbers and all the connections between the wordplay and things.
Okay.
How was it supposed to be conveyed to the people back then?
Well, probably enough people were literate to write poetry or something. Yes. So it's a good question. There's probably a mystery. So you're illiterate, you can hardly do numbers, and someone tells you that Nero Caesar is 666, and and so then you believe it and repeat it. But yeah, that's a good question. How literate was the society? Yeah.
I guess to get the contextual part of how deep Revelation is into the thoughts.
Yeah, well, it would have been read among the people, and people would know about it. And I guess if you're illiterate, you probably remember some of this stuff more vividly than if you're literate and just skim over it.
Yeah.
So yes, someone had asked me about another image, the image of the prostitute, the Babylon the Great, out of here we got Revelation 17. Woman dressed in purple and scarlet with glittering with gold, precious stones and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. The name written on her forehead was a mystery. Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. And she was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. So later on it says she sat on 7 hills. What city has 7 hills? Rome. Yeah. So that he's that's one of those things. This is like a separate vision almost. It seems separate from some of the others. And I said, on the first section, the worship scrolls, that the only way I could make sense of it was pulling it apart into 4 separate visions that he composed together rather badly. I think the same is true for this war scroll things here, but I didn't take the time I couldn't easily figure out how to do it. But I think one could make a study of this as He writes the whole book as if it was one long vision, but almost certainly he had a number of visions and pieced them together. And I don't think he did it very well, but. So, yeah, so other images that you had from that, yes.
Well, I was always sort of interested in the part with the angels and Saint Michael and the dragon and the big battle in heaven and throwing Satan out. Were there more angels involved in that?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting that there's a battle in heaven and it's not led by the Lamb or Jesus, it's led by Michael, the angel, and he appears in other apocalyptic writings as the servant of God who leads the armies of the righteous against the devil. So he, in this case, they throw the devil down and he gets out of heaven, and then that is reminiscent of other stories of the ancient stories of where they're wise are good and evil. Though the Satan was an angel and he fell, and read let's see the famous poet Milton's Paradise Lost and things like that. So yeah, but yeah, to me, yeah, so he has Michael and other angels. That seems to be the only angel he has here. Gabriel shows up in other visions, but not this one. Yeah, here.
Jonathan, you're reading, do you know what other New Testament writings John's audience would have had access to? Would they have had access to Paul's letters? Would they have had access to any of the Gospels?
Yeah, the question is about access to Gospels and other things. They probably, yeah, they would have had Paul's letters, since Paul had been in this area of Asia Minor. The people who he's writing to would have had Paul's letters, would have copied them and sent them around and read them. So they would have had that. And the Gospels, the four Gospels, they probably would have had Mark. That was written around 50, I think. So yeah, but it's hard to know exactly what they had, but I think they would have had some of that or heard it, but I don't really know. So what do you think about this as a metaphor for fighting evil? Is it just overdone? Is there no God is love? It's kind of lost into the phrase wiping tears away from the eyes and healing of the nations, but yeah. What? Okay, let's say that a little louder.
John was eating mushrooms.
Oh, yeah, mushrooms. Yeah, what did he do to get a vision like that?
If we look at World War II, and if we look at the Nazis as being utter evil, and the United States and the Allies as being good, side of God, we certainly did a lot of destroying and killing, and fighting against people. I would say as much or more than it's predicted shown in Revelation.
And yet, Nazis got that idea from the United States.
Well, yeah, actually, yes, fighting World War II is often viewed as the good on our side, fighting the evil of the Nazism. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Third Reich was to last 1,000 years. They took the 1,000 years from the book of Revelation. That was going to be the time of God's people ruling on the earth. But again, that's a different perspective. So, yes.
I think that actually also detailed them, like even the system of the world right now, like the system can be used for evil.
Yes.
And just like Bible. So it's one of those, like, we can interpret it the right way, which is why we come together to talk about it. We kind of all got us in the right direction, keep us like from swaying that, using, finding ways to make sure that these kind of things don't happen. The like changing the system to a way that benefits everybody as opposed to benefiting only a certain amount of people, or just an evil as a whole. I actually have faith in like in our system being able to change within itself. It's like removing stuff to be able to go into going forward with the right people and doing the right things.
Okay, so there was a comment about for those systemic problems in our evils in our system. In fact, in our Matthew 25 church, we talk about one of our things is to fight systemic racism. And I forget what the other one was, but they're, again, systemic problems. Well, we pretty much had Tom.
Well, I was just gonna comment that one of the problems that I see as a retired educator is that, there's a movement in the country to present our history as simply good,
Okay,
and we don't wanna look at the wars,
okay.
and I think that's the problem.
Yeah, okay, yeah, you're mentioning about way we look at our history. We are, some people want to say, oh, we are the good guys, and we've always been the good guys. We are God. In fact, many of the early settlers to our country, the white ones said, we're God's people in God's holy land. That's why you get these names of some of these cities in the East Coast, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and so forth. But yeah, we've got to maybe take a look for the beasts in our history as well as that. Well, time is really up. Thank you very much for your thought.
Okay, Jeff.